Which historical figure is often considered a hero but was actually evil? Most people you've ever heard of in a position of power. Einstein treated his wife like shit and then banged his cousin. For some reason, this is really common in history. Henry Ford was a mixed bag. On one hand, he did revolutionize manufacturing, and when auto sales outperformed expectations, he wanted to lower prices and raise salaries, which his board fought and took to the Supreme Court, who decided that the shareholders were more important than the customers and workforce. On the other, he was a eugenicist and supportive of fascist movements in Europe. If you want to get a different perspective on the Kennedys, you should definitely check out Maureen Callahan's book, The Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. It's a real eye-opener that dives deep into the darker side of this famous family. The book reveals how the Kennedys, who are often celebrated as American heroes, had a long history of mistreating the women in their lives. The stories are shocking and show a side of the Kennedys that is rarely discussed. After reading it, you might find yourself rethinking the legacy of this iconic family. Thomas Edison. Many of his patents were based on stolen ideas and inventions, but Edison was simply first at the patent office. After Tesla invented alternating electric current, which would provide a great technological progress, Edison funded the campaign against it, during which was electrifying to death dogs as the proof of deadly Tesla's invention. Jerry the mouse from Tom and Jerry. Tom is a household cat and it's his job to hunt Jerry. While Tom might do some crazy shit on his own, he's literally just following the order of his owner. Exterminate the vermin or you'll get kicked out of the house. Not to mention, sometimes Jerry is the one who starts the fight. He steals food from the refrigerator knowing that it might put Tom responsible for his selfish actions, and he sometimes taunts Tom when he's not bothering him even. As a child, we root for Jerry for being the underdog, but now, as an adult, I can wholeheartedly say that I despise Jerry from the bottom of my heart. Gandhi is often revered as a symbol of peace and non-violence, but there's a much darker side to his legacy that is rarely discussed. He has been accused of engaging in inappropriate behavior with young girls, which has led some to label him as a pedophile. These allegations cast a shadow over his otherwise celebrated image, and they challenge the way we view his contributions to history. It's a reminder that even figures who are widely considered heroes can have deeply troubling aspects to their lives. Most of them just depends which side you're on. Andrew Jackson, the man on the $20 bill, is often celebrated as a populist hero, but his legacy includes actions that were anything but heroic. Jackson claimed he was acting in the best interest of Native Americans when he signed the Indian Removal Act, which he argued would protect them by relocating them to lands west of the Mississippi. In reality, this policy led to the infamous Trail of Tears, where thousands of Native Americans were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands, suffering from disease, starvation, and death along the way. Jackson not only implemented this devastating policy, but also lied about its intentions, presenting it as a benevolent act while knowing the harm it would cause. His actions caused generations of suffering and left a scar on American history that is still felt today. Despite his portrayal as a champion of the common man, Jackson's treatment of Native Americans reveals a much darker side to his legacy, one that is rooted in deceit and cruelty. Jebediah Springfield, often hailed as the founder and hero of Springfield, has a dark past that few know about. He was actually Hans Sprungfeld, a ruthless pirate and murderer who reinvented himself to escape his violent history. While he's celebrated as a hero, the truth is far more sinister. This revelation challenges the idealized image of Jebediah and shows how easily history can be rewritten to hide the truth. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers and the author of the Declaration of Independence, is often celebrated for his contributions to American history. However, there's a deeply troubling aspect of his life that complicates his legacy. Jefferson had 6 children with Sally Hemings, who was not only his deceased wife's half-sister, but also his slave. This relationship highlights the hypocrisy of a man who wrote about freedom and equality while simultaneously owning and exploiting slaves. The power dynamics at play make it impossible to view this relationship as anything other than deeply problematic. Jefferson's actions reveal a darker side to a figure who is often idealized, forcing us to confront the contradictions in his life and legacy. Augustus had thousands of wealthy Romans slaughtered to take their wealth, made his closest family miserable with forced marriages and divorces, exiled his only child, and later her daughter as well, and of course launched campaigns of mass murder and enslavement against foreign tribes, but that was part of the job description, I guess. Peter Venkman, often seen as the charming and heroic figure in Ghostbusters, actually had some questionable practices. Walter Peck, who is often portrayed as the antagonist, had legitimate concerns about the Ghostbusters operations. Think about it. These guys were running around New York City with unlicensed nuclear accelerators strapped to their backs and maintaining a ghost containment unit with no regulatory oversight. Peck was within his rights to be concerned about the potential dangers, and in reality his actions were about ensuring public safety. Venkman's dismissive attitude toward these valid concerns casts him in a less heroic light when you consider the real risks involved. He was a dick, but he was right. Kurt Cobain. Him and Courtney Love both allegedly did heroin and coke while Courtney was pregnant with Francis. Francis was rumored to be born addicted to heroin. He made several creepy voicemails to Victoria Clark, threatening to hire a hitman and hurt her. He choked Courtney out over an argument about Kurt's guns. Among other things, he wasn't that great of a guy, no matter how good he looked. Charles Lindbergh. First transatlantic flight, poggers, but also supported the Nazis. If you mean historical figures traditionally supported in our narratives, or who were popular at the time, but who don't align with our modern sensibilities, or whose policies ended up leading to horrific long-term ramifications, yes. Charles Lindbergh was a really disturbing character who likely murdered his own 1-year-old son for being developmentally delayed. The case was reported as a stranger abduction gone wrong, but if you search for the Lindbergh baby, you will find plenty of cause for concern. Most of the heroes that died in the Alamo were shifty degenerates that were running from legal problems or financial ruin. Not to mention the entire reason Mexico went to war with Texas was because Anglo-American settlers who moved in began using the cheap land they bought to cultivate cotton, among other crops, using slave labor. Mexico passed a ban on slavery in 1829, and 7 years later, they ended up in a war against a renegade region of their country, filled with American settlers that refused to even talk about eventually phasing out slavery. All the talk of freedom and democratic rights were a precursor to the South's spin on why the Civil War happened. Texas was literally just an invasion of drunks and opportunists turned slavers that refused to obey the law of the country they emigrated to. Motherfucking Teresa. You know who won't be on this list? Jimmy Carter. The man is an absolute unit when it comes to humanitarian causes. Even after his presidency, Carter dedicated his life to helping others, whether it was through building homes with Habitat for Humanity or advocating for peace and human rights around the world. His legacy is one of compassion, service, and unwavering commitment to making the world a better place. Joseph Stalin is often viewed as a hero by some Russians and certain tankies, but the reality is far more sinister. While he's credited with leading the Soviet Union to victory in World War II, his regime was marked by mass purges, forced labor camps, and the deliberate starvation of millions. Stalin's rule was characterized by a level of brutality and oppression that places him in the same league as Adolf Hitler in terms of the sheer scale of human suffering he caused. Despite the propaganda that portrays him as a great leader, the truth is that Stalin's actions were nothing short of evil. leaving a legacy of terror and death that continues to haunt history. Here's the thing. People who do great things often seem to do awful things as well. Those great things don't nullify their atrocities. However, their acts of evil also don't cause their great achievements to be disregarded either. They just exist as people who did both, just like the rest of us, just to differing degrees. Fritz Haber is the best example. Without him, we wouldn't be able to feed most of the world. He also invented the compound the Nazis used to exterminate Jews. Humans are complicated creatures. For hipsters and some revolutionaries, Che Guevara is often idolized as a symbol of rebellion and justice. However, the reality is more complex. While he fought for what he believed in, Che was also responsible for numerous executions without trial and advocated for violent revolution. His legacy is a mix of idealism and brutality, making him a far more controversial figure than many of his admirers might realize. Robespierre is often viewed as a champion of the French Revolution's ideals, but his role in the Reign of Terror led to widespread executions and fear. His pursuit of revolutionary purity resulted in significant suffering and brutality. Oliver Cromwell is often celebrated in England with statues and monuments, praised as a capable military commander and a key figure in British history. However, this positive image overlooks the atrocities he committed, particularly against the Irish. Cromwell was responsible for multiple massacres of innocent Irish civilians, actions so brutal that it's hard to fathom how he could be remembered for anything other than his cruelty. The fact that he's still honoured in some circles is baffling, considering the deep scars his actions left on Ireland and its people. His legacy is a stark reminder of how history can sometimes gloss over the darker deeds of those in power. Reagan, we can draw a direct line to our current challenges to his tax law changes. I would add Nancy in there as well. I wish someone just said no to both of them, and I don't understand the current infatuation with their reign of terror. Che Guevara is often romanticized as a revolutionary hero, but a closer look at his life reveals a far more troubling figure. Guevara was a staunch supporter of communism and played a significant role in establishing a brutal regime in Cuba. He was also openly homophobic and misogynistic, with little regard for human life, as evidenced by the numerous executions he oversaw without trial. While he is idolized by some, the reality is that Che was responsible for immense suffering and upheld oppressive ideologies. His legacy is far from the heroic image often portrayed and serves as a reminder of the dangers of idealizing historical figures without fully understanding their actions. In the US, I feel like it's only been like 5 or 10 years that people are starting to second-guess the morality of Andrew Jackson, the horrific criminal against humanity that forced the Trail of Tears. I mean, he's on our money. Not considered by most people, but people who were in Yeltsin's team in the 90s tried to convince Russians that they were heroes. They saved Russians from famine and freeze, provided vital reforms, and didn't reach the end of the crisis. In fact, these reforms were prepared before their arrival and provided very hastily. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union, it put the whole Russian economy in a very difficult position. And then they didn't do anything to fix it, only begging for loans from the IMF and investing in pyramid schemes. Mao Zedong is often remembered as the founding father of modern China, but his legacy is deeply tainted by the atrocities he committed. Under his rule, millions of people died from famine, persecution, and political purges. Despite his significant role in shaping China, the human cost of his policies is staggering. Mentioning Mao's darker side can still be controversial, but it's essential to acknowledge the immense suffering he caused. George Washington. By all accounts, George Washington is at best an asshole, at worst, a war criminal. The Iroquois called him town destroyer for his genocide of over 40 Native American villages during the Sullivan expedition. Thomas Jefferson considers him to be a despotic tyrant. George Washington is a hard master, very severe, a hard husband, a hard father, a hard governor. From his childhood, he always ruled and ruled severely. He was first brought up to govern slaves. He then governed an army, then a nation. He thinks hard of all, is despotic in every respect. He mistrusts every man, thinks every man a rogue and nothing but severity will do. He has no idea of people being left to themselves to act. He thinks that they cannot think and that they ought only to obey. Also, he signed the Fugitive Slave Law to prevent slaves like his escaped Oney Judge from seeking refuge in other states. J. Edgar Hoover is often credited with founding the FBI and shaping it into a powerful law enforcement agency. But his legacy is far more controversial. While he did establish the FBI, Hoover also used it as a tool for his own personal agenda, primarily to gather dirt on political leaders and influential figures for blackmail purposes. His tactics included widespread surveillance, intimidation, and the suppression of civil rights movements. In many ways, Hoover's actions laid the groundwork for what some now refer to as the deep state, where government agencies operate with significant power and minimal oversight. Despite his contributions to law enforcement, Hoover's legacy is marred by the abuses of power that characterized his tenure. Almost every US president. Louis Mountbatten is often remembered as a prominent British naval officer and statesman, but there are deeply troubling aspects of his legacy that are frequently overlooked. Mountbatten has been accused of pederasty, and his role in the partition of India led to widespread violence and mass murder. As the last Viceroy of India, he oversaw the hurried and poorly planned division of the country, which resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands and the displacement of millions. The chaos and bloodshed that followed are a direct consequence of his actions, yet his darker deeds are often overshadowed by his public image. Mountbatten's legacy is a stark reminder of the devastating impact of colonialism and the personal failings of those in power. Churchill was considered a century outdated in his worldview even by the standards of the early 20th century. He was a massive bigot and staunch imperialist. He likely agreed with many of not all of Hitler's beliefs and fought against him simply due to his belief in British supremacy. That doesn't negate him being a hero, though he was still essential in achieving an Allied victory in WW2. He can be both a hero and a terrible person. George Washington and other US founders. The US Revolution is often painted as a glorious fight for liberty against a tyrannical empire. In reality, the UK was already one of most democratic countries in the world at this point, and the revolution was mainly motivated by the colonists' desire to expand west into the native lands Britain was guaranteeing, as well as fear at the growing movement in Britain against slavery. Gandhi, deeply racist and hypocritical scumbag who treated women atrociously, even by the standards of the time, and also a pedo. Harry S. Truman, one evil motherfucker. Go watch the film Downwind, 2023. It's streaming on Peacock. Basically, he had the First Nation people of the Western Shoshone and the Mormons of southwestern Utah labeled as low-use people so that they could test over 900 nuclear, atomic weapons on the Yucca Flat in Nevada, killing thousands through long-term fallout exposure. Not to mention the 2 atomic weapons he authorized to detonate over Japan in 1945. Maybe unpopular opinion, Winston Churchill. He literally starved millions of Indian people and was a racist to boot. He wrote about Native Americans and Australians, a stronger race, a higher grade race, a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place. Evil is indeed a complex term, and it raises difficult questions when applied to historical figures like Winston Churchill. Churchill is often celebrated as a heroic leader for his role in guiding Britain through World War II, but he also held deeply racist views and made decisions that had catastrophic consequences for millions, such as his role in the Bengal famine. His heavy drinking and controversial statements add further layers to his complex character. While some may argue that his actions during the war make him a hero, others might see his prejudiced views and harmful policies as evidence of a darker side. It challenges us to reconsider how we define and judge historical figures, acknowledging both their achievements and their flaws. ITT, a bunch of examples of people who are most well known today for being considered examples of people who were once celebrated and have since almost categorically been recognized as flawed or harmful. To add to the hot takes, Day knows Steve Buscemi was a firefighter on 9/11. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.